Now, public transport services in South Africa could be interrupted in some parts of the country as the South African Transport and Allied Workers Union intensifies its bus drivers' strike. The strike started on Friday with bus drivers calling for an 18% wage increase. Employers were offering an increase of 6.5%. Joining us now to discuss efforts to resolve the deadlock is Vincent Masocha. He's a spokesperson for trade union SATAO. Vincent, thanks for joining us here on Beyond Markets. There's a massive difference between what you're asking for, 18%, and what the bus companies are talking about, 6.5%. How are we going to close this, big gap?
Well, the most important thing is to ensure that at least the workers get a wage that is decent enough to beat the current pressures that are in the economy. And as a result, they found it much more reasonable that we can come up at least 18%.
But what is going into that 18%? I recognize the fact that we're talking about higher electricity prices, we're talking about the food, price of basic foodstuffs rising, but 18% is a very high double-digit figure, well above inflation, Vincent. How sure are you in this tough economic environment that bus companies can actually afford this? What are the variables that you put into this 18%?
There's a lot of factors in there. It's just that certain issues people do not feel comfortable when we talk about, but I think it's important for us to raise them. We know that some of these companies, majority of them are subsidized by the state, whereas at the same time they are making a lot of profits out of the passengers and commuters on a daily basis. And it's a business that we believe it's sustainable enough. It can also be able to sustain workers at very decent wages. And we know that workers in this country are responsible not just for one family, but for a whole lot of other families. And that is how we came to that conclusion. And that is this, by the way, a directive by the members themselves on the ground. Mm-hmm. And that is why we responded in that manner. Hence, we also saying that we are not very much rigid in terms of the position, but we are saying that we must be able to find a solution, and the solution must at least must be inflation beating, must be able to as well compensate workers enough such that we do not have a lot of disruptions in the system.
Now, take us through the people that you're dealing with, the employers. Of course, these are various bus companies. They are formulating themselves into what is called a bargaining council. Take us through how this council looks and whether you can, in fact, have a uniformed approach across companies whose financial position might differ from company to company.
Yeah, we also understand that certain companies might differ from company to company. And another problem about the employers themselves is that they are divided because they sit in two different associations. There's one called SABIA, South African Bus Employers Association, and there is one called COBIO, the Commuters Bus Employers Organization. And as a result, sometimes maybe they might not be having a particular coherent policy position. But we know that most of these companies, there's 62 of them in there. Together, of course, we belong with them in the bargaining council for the bus and passenger industry. And as a result, we are saying, look, they must be able to start unifying themselves. And as a result, it will be easy to start finding a uniformity among the earnings of the bus drivers. But we also know that most of them in all the provinces, your Great North Transport, your Northwest Transport Investments in the Northwest area, your Busco in Mpumalanga, KZN in KwaZulu-Natal, and the Golden Arrows in Western Cape. Most of them are subsidized as part and parcel of these subsidies that come from the provincial budgets. And they can indeed, we believe, afford to give better wages.
Take us through where the negotiations are right at the moment. We know that the strike started on Friday. We know that in many provinces, places like Mpumalanga and so on, commuters were left stranded with taxis picking up the bulk of passengers. Take us through what kind of talks you've held with these employer organizations and where the discussions are at and what the initial reaction has been to the demand of 18%.
Well, I think the employers, of course, are tempted not to be reasonable around the demand. But I think some of them, by the way, do understand because some of them attempting to give an offer that is
what was that offer
around
that they were
reasonable.
making?
We can't disclose it because we don't want to also divide.
Well, my sources say 9%. Am I accurate?
Well, the 9% is not even something close to what we're looking at. But there was
it's better than 6.5.
It's better than 6.5, but We are not saying that we've accepted it. We are currently consulting with our members, and we are hoping that once the consultation process is concluded, which is, by the way, very democratic and open, and we are allowing all the structures to speak, and we are talking about 62 bus companies, over 21,000 employees in that sector. So we must be as comprehensive as we can. Once we arrive at a position, we'll decide. We are hoping that whereas that is the case, the employers will also review their position, because certainly even the 9%, is not enough.
Now, of course, you're not the only union in this sector. You're the largest union, but generally in strikes, workers try and present a united front. Your colleagues in the other unions are not on strike. What impact has that had on your ability to drive, the negotiations with the employers? Yeah,
there are some of the unions, in terms of the historic structure of the South African working class, if you look at it and its history, sometimes you have always had this top layer of workers that are represented by certain unions, and others refer to them as elite unions. At this point in time, we know that some of them don't always go into strike, some of them are always on the fence, they check, and others are always ready to set us up against the employers, against our own members, so as to be opportunistically triumphalists out of the current crisis. But we will not be in a position where we can be blackmailed or put at a corner to agree to a certain offer as a result of the fact that another union is not striking or the other one is accepted.
Final question, Vincent. When you were involved in the truckers' strike, there was violence. What are you doing to ensure that this strike doesn't involve violence, and that those who want to go and work have the right to do so?
Yeah, well, post the truck driver strike, we have extensively addressed the issues of violence and the issues of managing and dealing with anger, as some of our members could have expressed anger such that they remain easily suspects in terms of the violence that was associated with that at that point in time, and we've disputed that, and we know even today that it's not our members. But today is clear, is clean, is disciplined order. There are no violence at all.